getting out there, you know. There was, yeah, welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Dr. Norton Mezvinski, and he's a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, I believe.
That's correct.
And he is a scholar, with particular interest in the Middle East, it's fair to say. Right. And Norton Mezvinski, welcome very much to Conversations.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to see you once again here.
Yes.
Now we have a book I want to show right at the outset, and let's let the people in the audience know what it looks like. It's called Jewish Fundamentalism in Israel, and he's the co-author of this book along with Israel Shach, who unfortunately passed recently, last summer, which is humanity's loss, I might say.
Yes, it is.
And I'm sorry for that. He was a close friend and colleague of yours, but we wanted to talk about this book and other matters. But I wonder if maybe you could, Norton, if you would, at the beginning, share some of your own background, where you were born and raised, educated, that sort of thing, and then we'll get down to talking about some of the the political and social and economic realities, particularly of the Middle East. But
all right. I was born in the Middle West. I was born in Iowa, and I grew up in Ames, Iowa.
Ames, yeah.
I grew up in Ames. I was born in a small town called Red Oak. And I went to the University of Iowa. I did all my graduate work, got my Ph.D. at the University of Wisconsin. Went to Harvard on a post-doctoral grant.
Was that in political science then? Or?
It was in history.
In history.
Everything was in
history. Okay.
Everything was in
history. A lot of it.
Well, there is a lot of
history, yes. That was a joke. But anyway,
right. And I then began to teach, and I was an instructor at City College here in New York. And then in 1967, in the fall of '67, I went to New Britain, Connecticut, to Central Connecticut. Then it was State College.
Yes.
And I've been there since.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well,
so I've been there quite a time.
Well, they're lucky to have you, and you're lucky to have them
I hope
as
so.
well.
I'm lucky to have them.
No, yes, right. Well, okay. These things usually cut both ways and so forth. But you had, when you did history, I made a joke, but there's something to it, because I did my graduate work and all that sort of thing in geography. There's a lot of that also. They're both very comprehensive fields, because you could do anything in the name of history of technology, history of intellectual, and
that is correct.
And so maybe we should ask you, did you tend to, when you were undergraduate or even graduate work, begin to specialize, or how did you specialize, or did you try and keep a Toynbee-like overview of the whole thing, or what was your attitude toward the discipline of
Well, we like to think that we learn a few things within a general context.
Yes.
But I started out emphasizing the history of the United States.
Okay.
I knew that I wanted to deal with Jewish history and Jews and immigration.
Good, yeah.
And so I did that first within the context of the United States.
Did you do dissertation?
Yes, I did my dissertation in that area. And I, for American history, it was unique. I did my minor in Semitics at the University of Wisconsin.
Semitics, the language?
Well, the field of Semitics, and the man I worked with in that field, Menachem Mansour, was one of the great scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I see, okay.
And so that broadened out the Jewish part of it.
Yeah.
And then after I began to teach, then I moved more and more into the history of the modern Middle East, and especially the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
All right.
And that's what I emphasize.
Yeah, well, it was very well grounded, and you're having had a grounding in Judaic history.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I had
extremely interesting story.
And I had a background, and I had a good background in that, even before I went to the university.
Yeah. Had there been interest in the family in that as you sat around the
dinner
table?
There was interest in the family. Yeah. My parents were Orthodox Jews in the middle of Iowa.
Okay, that's pretty unusual.
And we had more family in Israel than in the United States.
Yes.
And so when I began the University of Iowa, my intention was to finish 4 years, get my BA, and then go to Israel and do what we call in Hebrew my aliyah, go to Israel to live.
Really? You had that in mind?
That's right. And when I was a junior in college, after I had had a few history courses, one day I asked myself a basic question.
Yeah.
Could it be that in a conflict this significant, important, and large, that one side, namely the Israeli Jews, were 100% correct, and all of the Arabs were 100% wrong?
Yeah.
And if my father were here with us now,
he would say they
he
were.
would say yes, but he'd go further and say, from his perspective, it was all downhill for me after I asked that basic question.
I see. Well, he was a wise man, or he had a certain view of things and everything like that.
And so I then began to move in some different ways in terms of my thinking. Or better put, I think that my mind opened a bit.
To looking at things in a comprehensive kind of way.
That's right.
Whereas you had been sort of one-sided in view of that from
I'd been
your youth?
one-sided, and I asked myself at the same time, I asked myself, how many Arabs did I then know? And I knew 4, and they were in Israel, and they had been introduced to me by my relatives who were the most chauvinistic Israeli Jews.
Really?
I knew something about what an Uncle Tom meant in the United States. So it was not hard to conclude that probably those 4 fitted in that category, and I then decided that one thing I needed to do to broaden my perspective was to get to know more of the people of that civilization and more of their history and more of their culture.
Well, they've been interlinked, haven't they, over the long haul?
They have
Particularly,
been.
maybe you could fill us in for a few minutes on the history of the Judaic people. Now, we begin with Abraham. Or, you know, you know, what did you learn in terms of that when you were studying the history of the Judaic people that might be worthwhile summarizing here as things that you...
Difficult to do in a sentence or two.
No,
but
try haiku. You know, no, but if you could. But I mean, there was an association with the city of in the Sumerian times or something. Or, you know, what is the history? What do we know about it in a summary kind of way? Because you did a lot of your dissertation and that. And everything.
Yes.
Let's take advantage of that early.
Let us say we have 2 categories. That overlap.
All right.
One is Judaism and the history of Judaism.
Yes.
And the other is the history of Jews and the history of the Jewish people.
They're not the same?
No, they aren't, because everyone who believes in Judaism is a Jew, but not all Jews believe in Judaism.
I see.
Some of them are avowed atheists, for example.
I know some,
That's right.
But they are Jews.
They still consider themselves Jews, and actually, not only that, but according to the religious law in Judaism, if a person is born of a Jewish mother, that person is a Jew, even if that person converts to another religion. If the person converts, the person is, Talmudically speaking, an apostate, which is a not so good Jew religiously, but still a Jew. So we have 2 categories. As I say, they overlap. And the scholars who deal with origins of both, many of those scholars are in some disagreement about the exact beginnings. I mean, some will date, for example, the history of Judaism beginning with Abraham, some will date it beginning with Moses, some will date it beginning at other times. And so it is with the history of the Jews as well.
And if we were to do it with Abraham, what are we talking? I mean, when we can begin to identify through whatever literature or so forth, the unique group of people, the Judaic people, what dates are we talking about?
Roughly 1,800 years before the Common Era.
1800 BC, or BC, right? Yeah. Is it first? And are they associated with Ur? Am I wrong in that? Early Judaic experience.
That's a geographical area.
That would be in what is now Iraq.
That's right. That's right.
And Abraham. I mean, what is our attitude toward Abraham, or our understanding of what the Abraham, legacy is?
Well, that all depends on who it is who is looking at it.
Well, you're a historian, So.
Well, yes, but if I think about the scholars who deal with that time period, some of them are in some disagreement. I'll give you one example.
I think so. I mean, it's a myth of history.
Well, I mean, there is a disagreement, for example, as to whether or not Abraham was a monotheist, because in the biblical text itself, Abraham says that his God was the strongest of the gods, or
of the gods.
Yeah,
plural.
So you see, so some people say, well, that's not monotheistic. Others have a somewhat different interpretation.
But it would be, if we think in terms of religions and so forth, we have the Hindu with all kinds of gods and things like that, but the monotheistic traditions of the West is anchored in the Judaic experience, no? or do we go to Zoroastrianism, or you know, I mean, where do we?
It depends again on who it is who's making.
I think what I'm looking for are roots that go very deep in terms of the Western experience, which are Judaic. In terms of the cultural and religious traditions, they're built upon those roots.
They are. If we take Judaism, Christianity, and Islam,
yes, certainly.
Those three religions, obviously, clearly, Judaism is the oldest of the religions.
Absolutely.
So if we're talking about
those are the
roots,
monotheistic religions.
that is
Western.
one of the major arguments that's put. We have to say there are some people who would not be in total agreement with that, but that is a general consideration. So within that general consideration, it's true, Judaism is the oldest of the three.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a tie between them all.
There is a tie.
And even the Muslims now, who you had there weren't any Arabs in Ames? Not even at a deli or something? You didn't have any truck with Arabs in Ames,
Not when I was
Iowa?
very young, but when I was in grade school, I was the only Jew.
I see. So you had a lot of Christians to deal with. Yes, right. I see. Yeah.
Well, I really grew up in two societies.
Yeah.
Because Ames is 27 miles from Des Moines, and Des Moines had Jews. So my father, who wanted me to have a good Jewish education from age 5, he would take me into Des Moines or have one of the people who worked in his store to study with a private teacher 4 times a week.
Hebrew?
And then Hebrew, Jewish history, Bible, and then I had my Jewish friends. So I had this society in Ames, and 27 miles away, I had another society.
And you had a father to care.
And I had a father that cared.
Oh, that's good. And you had all of that. Now, you had that, so that's a background and so forth. And then you naturally grew out of that. He was Orthodox, right?
That's right.
And then he had a natural thing in the history, and you were interested in that, and you did all of that work. And what made you start branching out, and what were some of the things that, were you on a certain course with that right through your dissertation time and so forth? Did you have a certain idea, a historiography, or some sort of idea of history, or broad themes that you were interested in, and have they stayed with you? Have you veered from that? Have you changed in terms of this core values that were involved necessarily in the decision you made to study very intently the history of the Judaic people?
I clearly had an idea that I wanted to study history of Judaism, history of Jews in one context and or another, or more than one context.
Right.
But then for a very long time, I've also devoted myself, it's a kind of cause commitment for me, to the major aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
All right. Well, that's the thing that's
the thing
last
that
few decades you've been involved in that.
We can say at least for the last 35 to 40 years.
Based on a very good, well-grounded, individually family-oriented, personal interest and so forth, grounding in Judaic history.
Yes, I think
Now, that's a very, very good basis to come to that, it seems to me, if I may, that you're not just, coming dilettantishly to this, but you really got a grounding in it. So, when did you do, what did you do your postgraduate work at Harvard in?
I did it, mostly I dealt with Jewish immigration into the United States.
Interesting. Yeah, what an interesting story that is, yeah, and where they are and that sort of thing.
That's right.
And then you got more interested in and you've become very interested in Israel Shahak. And Israel Shahak, as I said, is a very close associate and friend at a very close personal level, shared speaking tours and so forth with Noam Chomsky.
That's right.
Who is a major figure in linguistics.
That's right. They were the closest of friends, and in one of his earliest tours in the United States, speaking tours, Israel Shahak toured with Noam Chomsky, speaking.
Well, you introduced me to him, if I may say so.
I did. I'm the one who first brought Israel Shahak to the United States on speaking tours.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I was able to do an interview with him. He's a marvelous man. He had written the book, if I may, let me try and recall it. It was Jewish History, Jewish Religion, Jewish History, 3,000 years.
The weight of 3,000 years.
The weight of 3,000 years.
Right.
And he took some exception to some normally accepted notions of Judaism and so forth. He had a unique view. He had a broad mind. He was a very liberal man, very wide thinking. And
he was a lover of prophetic Judaism and a person who was terribly antagonized by Talmudic Judaism.
Now, talk to some of those things. What are we talking about? I don't know. What's the difference? What are you talking about, if you could? Share with us.
Well, let's start with Talmudic Judaism.
Okay.
Talmud was written in the first 5 centuries of the Common Era. We actually have two Talmuds. One is a Jerusalem Talmud and one is a Babylonian Talmud, but the authoritative one is the most authoritative is the Babylonian Talmud, and when people just use the word Talmud, they're referring to the Babylonian Talmud.
Okay, yeah.
So let's say it's written over a period of almost 5 centuries, not in Jerusalem, of course, but in Baghdad. In fact, if we had to pick for traditional Judaism, the major center of Jewish learning, it would not be Jerusalem historically, it would be Baghdad.
Interesting.
Because the Talmud became and still is the heart center of traditional Judaism. Why is that the case? That's the case because the Talmud in over 60 large, complicated volumes explains the Bible.
All right.
And in traditional or Orthodox Judaism, as we now call it, that explanation is regarded as every bit as much the Word of God as the Bible itself, and probably even more than the Bible because it explains the Bible.
Well, wait a minute. Aren't these interpretations of rabbis and so forth of the Torah and so forth? They
are.
Wouldn't that be the grounding, the Torah, and that, you know? Yeah.
Well, of course, when we
and the other was commentaries on it by people who followed after, or maybe I'm out of sync with.
Not exactly.
All right.
Torah, first of all, has a more narrow meaning and a broader meaning.
Okay.
I mean, Torah can mean the 10 Commandments. It can mean the 5 books of Moses, but it also can mean, and for many traditional Jews does mean, all knowledge, because their contention is that all knowledge from the beginning of the world through our time period and forever is contained in the Bible. That's their belief. Now, the Talmud explains the text of the Torah in ways that it could not be understood. I'll give you one small example.
All right.
That's a good illustration. There is one phrase in the Bible that says that a Jew should not cook a kid in its mother's milk, a goat. Now, the question is, what does that mean? Well, the Talmud explains what that means, and from that we get that whole part of the dietary laws that dictate that Jews should not mix milk with meat dishes.
I'll be darned, really.
And so, without the Talmud, according to traditional Judaism, we would not be able probably to understand what that phrase meant.
Because so much was allegorical and metaphorical?
Well,
and so
because there wasn't explanation. And that's why, for example, if one even today goes into seminaries where Orthodox rabbis are trained, one will find that they spend the great majority of time over a period of years studying not the Bible text per se, but studying Talmud.
Oh, really?
That's right.
I'll be darned. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. That's the major source of study for that.
That's the major source
in the
of
Orthodox,
study.
or would there be a difference between that and conservative reform?
Well, let's go to Reform.
All right.
There's a major difference. If one goes to the Reform seminary, well, there might be a requirement to take 1 3-hour course in the Talmud because it's regarded as something that was at one time an important part of
the canon
of Jewish literature.
Yeah, okay.
But it's not regarded as canon.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
So in Orthodoxy it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Ah,
so the point is that if we take traditional or Orthodox Judaism on the one hand and Reform Judaism on the other hand, granted it's within the Judaic context, but one can really say there are two different theological formulations.
That's interesting.
And if we then take conservative, conservative is somewhere in the middle, and I say somewhere in the middle because although we can specify a theological formulation for traditional Judaism or Orthodoxy, and we can specify a theological formulation for Reform Judaism, we cannot so easily do that for conservative Judaism.
Well,
we have a Yiddish phrase, nishtahir or nishtahin. It's neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there. On one hand, on the other,
That's
I would think I've heard it said.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
And that's why it's the middle ground.
So talk to me a little bit about this Judaic thing, because we want to get to the present, obviously. Because, but I mean, this idea that we've got a couple thousand years or something, you got the Judaic tradition. Was it all throughout the law? When did Reform develop? as a
18th century of the Common
It's only
Era.
from the 18th century, and
Central
prior to
Europe,
that,
Germany,
all of Judaism had been a matter of Orthodox concern.
Judaism had been,
you
yes,
know.
Judaism had been Orthodox, or I like the term better, traditional Judaism,
All right.
with some heresies along the way.
All right.
There were some heresies along the way.
And some that made that held on and still are there. I mean, Baal Shem Tov or something, or the
Well,
or the
no, Baal
Hasidic
Shem
thing?
Tov, no, that would have to be put, that's Jewish mysticism, that's an offshoot, but some traditional Jews would, I suppose, call it a heresy, but others wouldn't. They would just say, well, that's an offshoot.
But is that your Hasidic? I mean, Hasidic tied to that?
That's Hasidic, and that's one part of Jewish mysticism.
Yeah, part of Jewish mysticism, but it's also in the Orthodox vein?
Yeah, it is. Oh, yes, it's in the Orthodox vein.
So we have, and we get into the 18th century. You say 18th century for Reform?
18th century
How did
Reform
that come?
starts.
Was it something, we had the Catholic Church and the Christian tradition, and we had a Reformation, we had a Luther. We had a big thing, Reformation, Counter-Reformation, sort of thing. Is that sort of thing going on in the Judaic realm?
Not
what has been
quite to the same extent. What happened was it started in Germany, and there were some rabbis who were traditional Orthodox rabbis, but they wanted to make a few reforms that were not basic theological reforms. For example, they wanted to put some of the German language spoken on the street into the synagogue service.
Why?
Now, because they thought, because
it could be understandable.
That's right.
Yeah.
They understood.
Just like Latin in
that's
Catholic.
Right. They understood that only a few Jews really were fluent in Hebrew.
Just like
so
there
they
weren't very
wanted
many
to do that.
Christians in Latin.
They wanted to make some modern revisions in the liturgy. They wanted to do some of those modern things, and so there was a disputation between them and the more traditionals to whether that should be done. But then it grew from that. And when it grew, then we had some reformers who became basic theological reformers who then said that the Talmud was not necessarily the authentic Word of God.
It was but literature.
It was but literature, and it was commentary, and it helped explain, they said, in the time period of, in the literature of a certain time period, it helped explain some of the moral and ethical principles, but that the dictates need not be taken literally because they were not dictates of God necessarily.
Now, we had the Protestant Catholic traditions here, the Orthodox, and so in the Judaic tradition you have the Orthodox, and then you have this Reform, you have other things, conservative coming. So does one lead more towards secularism? I mean, because the world has gone secular. A lot of the world has gone secular in the modern experience. And how do we get to the secularization and to the movement of people away from studying, let's say, a whole life of studying Torah to where they started taking up medicine, science, and these kind of things, started applying themselves in that direction, more than just studying the holy books?
There's almost no question that that was far more the path of reform.
That's what I would have thought.
That's
in the 18th century, and that was European by and
That's
large.
right, because in traditional Judaism, for example, for centuries, there was the same thing that we find in some other religions,
maybe Islam.
Islam
fundamentalism.
That is, there was this negativism about even studying secular subjects.
Yeah, there would have been. There would have
right.
been, like there are among some of the fundamentalist Islamic people now, do not think that you have to study anything but Quran.
That's right.
And there's still people who think that, and I suppose there are some within the Orthodox Jewish tradition who think you need to read nothing but Torah and Talmud.
We wrote a book about any of them.
Yes, right. Let's show them again. Let's see what it is. So that's what we're talking about. Jewish fundamental. What do we mean when we say Jewish fundamentalism against this background that we've been talking about? What is Jewish fundamentalism in Israel? And what's the book about, and what's the phenomenon?
Jewish fundamentalism refers to the belief of those Jews who fit into this category about which we were just speaking.
Yeah.
Who feel that all knowledge is in the Torah. The Torah that needs to be studied is, yes, the biblical text, but mostly the Talmud. That secular studies should not be included. But more than that, these are people who believe that in many ways Jews are indeed the chosen people of God.
Right.
And I'm sorry to say, chosen in a superior way.
Yeah, well, wouldn't most, if I may, if you take chauvinism, nationalism, or any of these kind of things where people tend to see themselves in a special light, there's a lot of sociological movements in the world where people tend to see themselves in the best way. We sing the United States of America is the home of the free and the brave, and we stand for the best, and the French feel they are the best, and the Germans feel they are the best. There's a lot of that in the human society and in human history, isn't there?
There
people
is,
who identify
but here we're talking about...
Is it some sort of unique way that Judaic people in the Orthodox tradition set themselves apart from the rest of humanity, other than just xenophobic nationalism?
No, I don't think it's necessarily...
No. You know what
I don't think
I'm
it's
saying?
necessarily unique, because there are people who are believers in other religions, some, who have similar views, similar views.
I would say it would be the norm in human society, that
well,
most nations see themselves as the shining hill on the light, or the hill in the city on the hill.
But there are extremities.
You know what I'm saying, though?
There are, yes, but there are extremities. For example, many of these Jewish fundamentalists we deal with here, they believe, and they have said, and they continue to argue, that the soul of a Jew, for example, is far superior to the soul of non-Jews. In fact, the soul of non-Jews might be equivalent to the soul of a dog or a cow as opposed to a human being.
They would go that far.
They would go that far.
Not
only would they do.
Yeah, in the United States, a Negro was only 3/5 of a human being.
Yes,
in law
this is even,
of this nation.
Yes, this
so
is
I mean,
this is even more.
Racism is also there, part of the human experience. It differentiates into various groups. Some people say we're Homo sapiens. Some people say we're Homo sapiens sapiens. There's a few Homo sapiens sapiens. They tend to be us. You know, they're advanced. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, but that's it's particularly so. You say, and that's what you've investigated, you in Israel.
Yes, and we say, and we did it. Jewish fundamentalism in Israel. Not to say that all the Jewish fundamentalists are in Israel. There are Jewish fundamentalists in other places, including the United States. But we focused upon Jewish fundamentalism in Israel. We focused upon those people, and we also focused upon their importance in Israeli Jewish society.
Okay, and do they tend to be Orthodox?
They're the most extreme of the Orthodox.
The most extreme of the Orthodox tend to differentiate themselves as the chosen people in a biblical sense.
They say Jews are the chosen people.
Yeah, and they would say that. They would say, in the most extreme sense, they would say that. That term is it? Are there people that are more secular, more who still feel that within this normal way in which nations tend to identify themselves as the paragon of virtues?
There are Jews who are not religious at all, who are secular,
who still think they are the chosen people.
Well, but they do not consider themselves necessarily the chosen people of God.
No.
They will just, as you've said, they will consider themselves to be better.
Yeah.
But here we're talking about people who say they are better, they are chosen because God made them so.
And they can go to liturgy, or they can go to the text and so forth to say that they were so identified. And is that an important force in terms of Judaism? Particularly within Israel?
The answer is historically it's been important within Judaism, and in the modern time period, let's say in the past half-century plus, since the State of Israel has been in existence, this group in Israel is also important, not necessarily because of their numbers, but rather because of the important positions that they have held within Israeli Jewish society.
Okay, now look back. You got who was when did the Zionist movement that led to Israel get started in Russia? Was it up in Russia, and 100 years ago or something like that? And it got started, but it was there. And then when you had Ben Gurion and so forth, they tended to be socialist, secular people that were the Ashkenazi that were involved in terms of, as I understand it, the original establishment of the State of Israel in those difficult years after the Second War. Were they not? I mean, I associate it with those people that tended to be, even could be seen almost as leftists and that sort of thing in their political thinking. And the Orthodox.
It's a bit more complex.
And if I may, the Orthodox, if you go to Orthodox, I don't know if you differentiate Hasidic from the Orthodox and what you're talking about, but if you go to the Orthodox rabbis were, even 100 years ago, or much less much of the Jewish community, was very much against the idea of Zionism, because it, first of all, they said it had to be done in terms of Torah, in terms of totally peaceful and that sort of thing. Nobody disrupted, that sort of thing. And also it required the Mashiach in order to lead people into there in an Orthodox sense. So they were opposed to it. And you got a few remnants of them in what they call the Natura Carta, who are very anti-Zionist now, but they are very Orthodox and that sort of thing. Can you talk to a couple of those issues?
Yes.
And then this idea of who established Israel, it was Ashkenazi socialists by and large, I thought. Now, set me straight.
First of all, Zionism and the Zionist movement are very important because Zionism forms the character of the State of Israel, and I think that's at the heart center of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
You do?
I do.
All right.
Now, there is a bit of disagreement about when Zionism began. Some people date it
1895.
Some people date it in the middle of the 19th century, and then they say that by the time we come to the 1890s with Theodor Herzl, who's generally regarded as the father of Zionism, that then he's the one who solidified political Zionism. I rather would start it with Theodor Herzl and say we had a few precursors before Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl.
Plus people over a few hundred years saying next year in Jerusalem always. There was always a longing.
But that is as opposed to the propaganda that we hear was not really part of the Zionist movement per se.
No. That was a wish.
That's a wish
for Mashiach.
and that is something that was then incorporated in one small sense. But anyway, if we take Theodor Herzl, for example, as the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl clearly was a secularist. In fact, he was an avowed atheist. And then we had a good many other Zionist leaders, the majority, who also were secularists, certainly not Orthodox Jews, and not religious Jews.
Not even religious
It's also
Jews.
correct. It's also correct that into the 20th century and probably right up into the 1930s, that a goodly majority of Orthodox traditional rabbis were opposed to Zionism for two reasons that you hinted at. One, the secondary reason was that most of the leaders, not all, but most of the leaders, had been and were secularists. But the major reason was that from the time of what we call in Jewish history the Bar Kokhba revolt, 135 to 136 of the Common Era, there was a principle in traditional Judaism, and the principle was that the Jewish state would not and should not be reestablished until the Messiah comes, until we get the kingdom of God on earth, and Jews should not try to bring it about before that, and it would be sinful to try to do it.
A heresy.
That's right. So
that was from 135?
135 of the Common Era.
That's not part of the reading of Torah.
No. Well, no, because there was a very famous rabbi then who came up with this principle, and that was regarded as it's part of Torah, because Torah is all knowledge.
It's an interpretation
but
of Torah.
You see, this is one rabbi's sense of what God's word was.
And that came to be accepted in a way that made it legitimate?
That's right.
So that was a principle not to be violated.
That's right. But we also had, from the end of the 19th century, from the beginning of the 20th century, we had a minority segment, of religious Jews who did call themselves Zionists, who
from 135?
No, not 135. No, I'm talking now when the Zionist movement started.
With Herzl.
With Herzl. We had some who were Zionists, regarded themselves as Zionists. They didn't want secular leaders to be the heads. But how did they regard themselves as Zionists? They manufactured a different kind of interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Mr. Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Mashiach. Huh?
That's my bias. I suppose.
Right.
But they came up with this interpretation. Their interpretation was that the Messianic age had dawned. And in ways that we human beings cannot understand, God had decided that there should be a movement for the Jewish state,
even though
and God had
preparing the way for the Messiah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And God had also, for reasons that we could not understand as human beings,
because it's
picked some secularist Jews to be among the leaders. So then
that was among rabbis. That was among Orthodox rabbis. Among Orthodox rabbis.
Yes, this was a small minority.
Yeah.
Now, and so those rabbis then said that yes, one should work for the coming of the Jewish state. One should work for the existence of the Jewish state.
Because that'll help Mashiach along.
Right. That's right. It's part of God's design about what is happening.
And did that come to be accepted?
No. It
Okay.
wasn't accepted.
All right.
It was only accepted by a minority.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. But
influential
then,
minority?
not terribly influential until we come to the late 1930s and into the early 1940s with the Holocaust, and then things changed.
Yeah.
And then what happened, the majority of those rabbis, let us say, who were terribly anti-Zionist, traditional rabbis who were terribly anti-Zionist, most of them, not this group of Natura Carta, but most of them changed. They did not say they had become Zionists, but they said they said they were not anti-Zionists. They said they were non-Zionists, and when the state came into existence, they then said, we are going to become part of the state because this state needs to be more religious and more theocratic. So they became part of the state, and one major reason that they wanted to be involved in the state is they wanted the government of the state of Israel to finance their religious schools, which the state of Israel has done. So we had these people move into that context. But then we had that segment that had been religious Zionists, and that segment also grew after the Holocaust.
And where do those things stand now? Or where has it
now we have
What is the reality now?
Well, we have.
And you had these political leaders, Ben Gurion and so forth, who were understood and be able to go along with by these Orthodox. So
most of the religious traditional Jews are Zionists. Most of them are extreme Zionists. Yes, well, Natura Carta is one group, and there are a few others who are not. And then there are a few Israeli Jews who still call themselves non-Zionists. They are even in the government. They're terribly anti-non-Jews, all non-Jews, but they still call themselves non-Zionists.
They're anti-non-Jews.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, they're anti-non-Jews.
They're among the most antagonistic, and that means within the dynamics of the state of Israel, that means many of them are the most extreme antagonists of Palestinians.
Now, the secular carriers or Herzl and so forth like that, what was their attitude toward the messianic notion, the Mashiach and so forth, that was intrinsic to much of the Judaic thinking, that that's what happened traditionally, and toward this other small group that you were talking about who said that the Messianic age had been brought in? Did they say it doesn't matter if it's been brought in, it's a political matter now, it's a this, or did they disassociate themselves disassociate themselves from the religious traditions about the gathering at the end time and that kind of stuff, and did they just make it a geopolitical kind of thing that we can do now, or what was their attitude toward that? The traditional Jewish attitude toward Mashiach and so forth.
Attitude of...
They see that as legend and
the attitude of Herzl and the attitude of those people was their attitude was, we don't really believe in this, but we need to have as many Jews as possible come into the Zionist movement to work for the Jewish state. So if there are Jews who believe that, they should come in and do it. If there are Jews like we are who are secularists and who don't believe that and really don't believe in religion,
they were pragmatic on that. Okay, now we've done all this, the background and so forth. What's the status? How have things gone? I mean, we got this thing started, you know, the whole history of things. I heard you say you thought that was the core of the problem, and we're looking at things now on, what is January 3rd of the year 2002?
That's right.
What is your feeling about the situation as we look at that part of the world?
Well, if we're looking at Arab-Israeli conflict, and more specifically Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's at one of its worst points that it's been at ever since the State of Israel came into existence.
That's the way it seemed to me.
And it certainly is worse now than it has been for 20 years. I suppose we could go back to the time when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and say, well, that was a bad time too. But so I'm saying that it's at a very bad level, and the major reason, of course, as we all know, is the amount of violence, the numbers of people killed and the numbers of people wounded consistently. And by consistently, I mean, if not every day, every second day, every third day, every fourth day.
Yeah, it was really getting that way, and it's getting very worrying. Maybe there's some filling we could do there. Is it an issue that resonates, or what is I heard you say you study some of the Arab world and so forth. We got all these different countries and so forth from the colonial era, and then we got this different thing. What is the attitude of the Israeli world toward Israel, and what's the trending?
Let me answer it this way. I started to say it before. The heart of the conflict, or better put, the essence of this conflict, the essence of the conflict is Zionism. That doesn't mean that that's the only cause of conflict. There are a variety of causes.
Conflict between Israel and,
the Arab-Israeli conflict, the essence of it, the heart center of it, really is the Zionist character of the State of Israel.
The Zionist character?
The Zionist character of the State of Israel.
Yeah.
Why? Because if we take Zionism, Zionism dictates an absolute view of anti-Semitism. That means
an
this.
Absolute view
absolute,
of... what does that mean? I don't understand.
It means this.
Yeah.
The idea is that Jews have been in the past, and or are being in the present, and or will be in the future, persecuted in all nation states wherein they are a minority.
I see.
Now that's an absolute view of anti-Semitism, because that means wherever Jews are in a minority in whatever nation state, they're going to be persecuted because somehow non-Jews, if not all of them, the majority of them, hate Jews.
I see.
That's
That's a core belief.
That's part one of the core belief. Part two of the core belief follows from part one in Zionism. Therefore and thereby, Jews need a nation state of their own where they start out as the majority, hopefully of the residents, but if not of the residents, then of the citizens who control the state. And not only do they have to start out as the majority, they have to remain the majority, because if they start out as a majority, but then because of immigration or birth rate or something, they become a minority, then we revert back to the absolute nature of anti-Semitism.
I see.
Now,
and they think the anti-Semitism is built into human nature.
Well,
or something.
Because of that, once we get the State of Israel, we then have laws passed by the State of Israel that still exist, laws passed that grant rights and privileges to Jews not granted to non-Jews, not even to those 1.2 or 1.3 million non-Jews who are Palestinians who are citizens of the state. Those citizens do not have all the rights and all the privileges of the Jewish citizens.
Right.
They have more rights and privileges than the greater number of Palestinians who are not citizens. But I'm saying, and why is that the case? That's the case to protect the Jewish nature or the Zionist nature of the state of Israel. Now, Israel. So
those are
means,
three components.
That's right. So Israel is an exclusivist state for Jews. I say exclusivist because that state, by law, there's no constitution, nothing above the law. That state, in its public policy, grants rights and privileges to Jews not granted to non-Jews, and that means there is, by definition, discrimination at least, and certainly oppression of non-Jews.
Couple things.
Now, wait, just let me finish.
All right.
Israel is certainly not the only state in the Middle East that's an exclusivist state.
Or through history.
But let's take the area today. Saudi Arabia is at least as much of an exclusivist state, and probably even more so, an exclusivist Muslim state or Islamic state. But the difference is, in terms of conflict, there are, let us say, 150 or 160 or 170 million Arabs in the Middle East.
I thought there were more than that.
Well,
but you say,
let us say there are more. We don't know exactly.
All right.
Now, and let's say the great majority of them are Muslims. The great majority.
Yes.
At least 80%, maybe 82%. Now, so a state that discriminates against non-Muslims discriminates only against a minority of the people in the area. There are 5 million Jews in the state of Israel. So the state of Israel that discriminates against all of the others discriminates against 95, 96, 97% of the people in the area. So I'm saying that even though one should say that an Islamic exclusivist state is, I would say, as immoral as a Jewish exclusivist state, and vice versa, as a practical matter, given the demography of the area, and Zionism and the exclusivist Jewish state is at the heart center of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
I see. Now, back off. You had three things. One was whether it's genetic or is given in the home space, that there is a unavoidable anti-Semitism that will be delivered down, has been, is, and will be delivered down upon the Jewish people by the Gentile world. And now, historically, what's the record on it? You're a historian. What's the record? Have they been? Are the claims of pogrom and of constant delivering down of anti-Semitism, disasters upon the Jewish people throughout the 2,000 years, is that accurate or not?
The record,
I mean, are they accurate in that? I mean, certainly it culminates with the Nazi and the anti-Semitism, but how accurate is that basic premise upon which they're basing their claim?
The historical record over centuries does not prove the case.
It does not?
Does not.
Does it indicate?
Wait.
They certainly were persecuted.
No, it does not prove the case. Has there been and is there still anti-Semitism in various places? That means nation states and parts of nation states. The answer is yes.
Yeah, there has been.
Until
very recently in the United States.
And there still is. And there still is.
Yeah.
All right. But it doesn't prove the case. And not only does it not prove the case, but if we take the United States, where let us say perhaps roughly up to half of the Jews of the world still live in the United States. If we take the United States, precious few Jews in the United States, by definition, believe in the absolute theory of anti-Semitism.
Precious few believe that.
Precious few. Why?
Really?
Because if they believed in it, then certainly they, within the last half century, most of them would have gone to Israel to live. And in fact, right after Israel became a nation state, David Ben-Gurion, the father of his country, came over here on lecture tours, too. And then the leaders of American Zionist Jewish organizations told him, please don't come back. You're antagonizing too many American Jews. Why?
Because he said to them,
he said, if you're really Zionist, you'll come over to Israel because you're going to get it one day, and so you better come now when you can get out with your lives and get out with your money and get out with your assets. It's good for you, and we also need you. Now, they didn't want him saying it, and the major proof of the pudding, if I can use a trite phrase, is that precious few American Jewish organizational Zionist leaders have gone to Israel to live.
Well, you had many opportunities here, and things were developing very well.
But obviously, they don't believe in the absolute theory of anti-Semitism.
Well, the absolute theory of but I mean, in a practical sense, I mean, you had certainly there was a case to be made for anti-Semitism in Germany and in Europe in the 30s and 40s.
But we
you even had here, we had movies, Gentleman's Agreement and things there. There were country clubs you couldn't go into. It was a branch of, and that's based against a longer history, and there there is this phenomena of anti-Semitism that has existed,
Harold,
and how valid is it? What is the reality of it?
Let me repeat what I said. I said the record does not prove the case,
Not prove.
even though in the record we have had and we still have anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
It doesn't
We
prove
have
the case.
racism, too.
Wait, it doesn't prove the case because the case is that there is this absolute anti-Semitism and
Built into the universe.
and Jews, that means all of them or almost all of them, if they haven't yet been persecuted,
They will be.
They will be.
Yeah.
Now here, I think it's correct to say that the greater number of Jews, understanding there's anti-Semitism, also have believed and do believe that the best way to combat anti-Semitism is within a relatively democratic framework such as we have,
policy.
that's right, such as we have in the United States. Well, that's a far different theory than Zionism.
Than Zionism. And
the absolute view of anti-Semitism.
And Mr. Ben-Gurion may have really believed that there was going to be a continuation and a growing anti-Semitism to where there would be concentration camps and so forth. And they came out of such a horrendous experience. But the longer history, the hundreds, the thousands of years of the Jewish experience, had they been, was it a constant matter of pogrom after pogrom?
No, of course it wasn't.
It was not. But
it was not,
many of them were
in the Middle East.
Many of them fit nicely into the society. They did well. They were merchants. They were this and that.
In many places, that was also the case.
Yeah,
that was also the case.
And this thing about the anti-Jewish attitude. What was? I mean, we haven't got time. But what was the source of the anti-Semitic fervor that motivated Nazi Germany in the way that it did? It was beyond rationality. It was beyond understanding. Where in the world did that come from?
Harold, you know, we've had a whole...
We got about 20 seconds. You have to go to a haiku. No, but
my answer for your 20 seconds is that we should have another program of at least 1 hour where we deal with that.
16 hours.
That's right. Where we deal with that stuff.
It's not fair. It's not fair to
where
say.
We deal with that stuff.
But it has been in a certain sense unique. What happened in Germany was a unique...
In its extremity, it's been unique, but we also need to point out, where did it occur? It did not occur, that's right. It occurred in the heart center of Christian Europe.
Yeah.
It did not occur in the heart center of the Islamic Middle East.
All right, that's interesting. That's interesting in and of itself. But that there could be that kind of an animosity. So we have the situation now, we only got a few minutes left. What's your prognostication for events developing in what is now, you know, the Middle East and what was Palestine and Transjordan and Israel and so forth? What's your prognostication?
I think things will get worse.
Things are going to get even worse?
They're going to get worse, or they'll stay as bad or get worse in the near term. The near term could be the better part of a year or even a little longer. I do think, though, that in my lifetime and in your lifetime, we will see a negotiated, compromised settlement of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
You do?
I do.
And what's standing in the way of that now?
The major thing standing in the way, there are two major things.
Two major. On the one hand and on the other. That's why.
One is the exclusivist nature of the State of Israel. And the second is the terribly unenlightened, negative leadership in both the Israeli Jewish community and, unfortunately, in the Palestinian National.
Well, you got bad leadership then, so it comes back to the first that you said, the exclusive. That is something that has a certain generic quality.
There is the exclusiveness. That is going to have to change. That's going to have to change.
That's a change on the part of the Jewish mentality?
Yes, and I think...
And what is the change that's going to have to be wrought in the mind of the Jewish supporters of Israel in order for a change to be made?
Jewish mothers and Jewish fathers are no different than other human beings who are mothers and fathers, and the time comes when they no longer want their children killed and wounded.
Well, that's all right. That can be understood in any kind of a situation
That is
where
correct.
it's going on. But there's something, you said there's something unique. I mean, bad leadership can be all over the world. We have bad leadership in Argentina. It's falling apart.
The bad
But
leadership hinders.
you said that there was, that hinders it. That's on all sides. That could be in the United States as well. We got pretty bad leadership. It could be seen in a certain kind of way. That kind of a question is there. I mean, Mr. Chomsky calls that to attention very often.
Yes, he does.
Thank God that he does and so forth. But you said there are two things. You took a thought of it.
No,
one was the exclusiveness. That was a certain attitude that seemed to be particularly characteristic of the Zionist view of the world.
That's right.
And maybe
the
you can
Zionist
that
character of the State of Israel has to change.
How would it work?
It seems to me that instead of having what many people argue we should have now, two states, an Israeli Zionist state and a Palestinian state, instead of that, I think that the solution will come when we finally have come to a majority of the people on both the Palestinian and Israeli Jewish side who say in this area of Palestine, we need to have a democratic secular state that by law grants and guarantees rights and privileges to all of the citizens there, regardless of race, religion, color, national origin.
Religion.
That's right.
So that would mean instead of it being an exclusively Judaic proposition, Israel, that's what's going to have to be compromised on the part of the people.
We're going to have to move to that.
And it's going to be hard for them to get over the idea that if they do
they're
this,
going to have to move to that, and
there
may be stages of development that people have to go through to move to that kind of state.
Yeah,
that kind of state will be the solution.
That would be a wrenching change for a great number of people now who are committed to Zionism in the way it is being exacted.
We've had
big change.
What
would bring that about?
We've had big change. Well, I said before, we've had big changes similar to that occur in other parts of the world, haven't we?
Where?
Well, we've had Germans and French who have hated one another terribly, and they have compromised their differences. It's not to say we don't have vestiges of hatred, but we don't have the kind of fighting and killing that we've had in the past, and that's in Europe. And we have other parts of the world where the same thing is true.
Now, we only got a minute left. What on that's on the Judaic-Israeli Zionist side. What change there has to be on the Islamic or Arab side?
Well, they're going to have to be compromises and changes there. The hatred that has come about in terms of the whole context of this Arab-Israeli conflict, the hatred of Jews and the anti-Semitism that has actually increased. It's actually increased in the Arab world in the last decade. That is going to have to be diminished.
And what will cause that to be diminished?
Again, the feeling that we no longer want to engage in killing and wounding, watching our children be
both sides. It would be an exhaustion of the situation.
I think so.
You think, and you think that may be at hand just by. We're just running out of patience.
I don't think it's yet at hand.
No,
but I
think within our lifetime, and that's getting shorter and shorter as I get older and older.
Well,
because
you and I will hopefully live a few more years.
Well, let's hope so. Well, we've only just scratched the surface of a huge subject, but I really thank you for helping to educate me a little bit, particularly on some of the Judaic history. We want to understand. We should go back to the roots to understand these things. It's been your pleasure as a perception. Norton Mezvinski, history professor at Central Connecticut State University, has written this amazingly interesting book. I know I've read it, co-authored with Israel Shahak, who we sad to say has passed on. He was a great intellectual force for improving the human condition, who just passed in the recent months from Israel. Thank you, Norton, for coming in and scratching the surface of this huge subject. We on Conversations invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for this particular segment. Once again, Norton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Until next time. So we got a couple of things in, but I'm trying to catch up.